of silly. And so, yeah, I'm available and I'm here to help.
Thank you so much, Cayle. And we'll also be sending Cayle's contact information out at the end if you have any questions for her specifically. And now I want to introduce our main event, Ken Siri, this evening. I had an hour-long conversation with Ken about self-direction and OPWDD, and I feel like he gave me about 5 years worth of knowledge in 1 hour conversation. So I am really looking forward to this presentation this evening. Ken knows all things self-direction and has a lot of experience with being a broker and an advocate for people with disabilities. And so we're so excited to have him here tonight. Thank you so much, Ken, for being here.
Thanks, Mallory, for the kind introduction and for raising the bar up here. I'll try to make it over. What can I say? So I'm a self-direction broker, as Mallory said. I'm also a single parent. My son's 22. He's on the autistic spectrum. We live in Manhattan. We've had a budget for about 7 years. As a broker, I work with a number of FIs, 12 to be exact, although most of my cases are with a handful. And I do have cases in a number of regions, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Long Island, Hudson Valley, and Taconic, but most of them are in Manhattan and the Hudson Valley. So I have a good view of the landscape of self-direction of the various regions, because there are regional differences, and with working with different FIs, because all the FIs, even though they do the same job, they do things differently. And again, as I like to think my value add is as a parent, and as using the budget for several years is helpful. As I mentioned, my son's 22 right now, so he has what I call a graduation budget, which is the larger budget. And previously, he was receiving services from the Board of Ed until 21, so we had the smaller or school age budget. So I've seen a good range of what's out there, and hopefully I'll be able to impart some information to you all and answer your questions.
Ken, right before
yes.
you begin, there was just one comment in the chat. If we could try to stray away from using acronyms, so that I think FI was the initial example, just if everyone's coming from different places. Thank you so much.
Exactly. No, and that's good. And I always, whenever I talk to a client, and especially at the beginning, I always tell them, first of all, slow me down, because I tend to talk fast, but I also say, back me up if I start throwing out the acronyms. It's sort of professional hazard here with that. But FI stands for fiscal intermediary. So feel free to stop me as we go forward. So I'll go forward with the presentation, folks here. So speaker background, I just gave you that a little bit. I'll let you know, so prior to taking custody of my son, who I mentioned again is 22 now, when he was age 9. Prior to that, I worked on Wall Street. I was an equity analyst at a number of places on the buy side and the sell side, and I covered the healthcare and technology industry. So I have a solid financial background that helps me with the numbers part of this business. And then, as I mentioned, being a parent and an advocate for folks with autism helps me with the social services side. So just a little add-on back there. When I talk about self-direction, frequently I get a number of, or I hear a number of misconceptions. So I like to try to clear some of those up at the beginning. The first one is program is expensive. There's no cost to anybody here. We're giving away free money. I mentioned to Mallory and Cayle at the beginning, my son, as I said again, is 22. When he turned 21, he graduated to the larger self-direction budget that an individual would receive when they're no longer receiving services from the Board of Ed. His budget's around $140,000 a year, and that's a typical size budget. If he has a budget until age 60, that equals about $5.5 million. So it's a significant amount of money that you're receiving here. And there's no expense to you involved. There might be some frustration, and hopefully we'll give you some tools to deal with that tonight. But there's no cost to participating in the program. As far as my child is too old or too young, an individual, my youngest clients, I have a couple who are age 4, and I also have clients who are in their 30s. Most of them are probably teens and a few in the early 20s. So there's, basically once you get out of the EI, which is early intervention program, you can apply for self-direction, assuming you have the Medicaid waiver first. Income too high or too low. Medicaid waiver waives the income requirement. That's what the waiver means. So again, I have clients who have virtually no income, and I have clients who are multimillionaires. So there's no income. The income is waived with the waiver, and that's basically OPWDD. Medicaid is allowing Medicaid funding to flow to individuals based not on financial need, but on the need of their disability. Benefits are minimal. So I just talked briefly about the amount of funds that my son has available to him right now, which is $140. When he was in school, it was $54,000 a year. So I don't think those are minimal. There's similar programs like self-direction in a number of other states, but none of them are funded to this level. So, and like I mentioned, it's millions of dollars over the course of someone's lifetime. Program requires a lot of time, not really from the parent perspective. There's a lot of waiting, and the entire process from beginning to end may seem to take a long time, which I will talk about, and it can, but the actual amount of time that you have to spend maybe filling out documents or in meetings is not really that significant, especially when we're talking about millions of dollars. And the program is frustrating. That one can certainly be true. And again, hopefully I'll be able to give you a reason why some of these things are slow. And when you go into the program, you're aware of how long some things may take, and hopefully that can alleviate or at least mitigate the frustrations. So here, so I was talking with Mallory and Cayle before all you folks joined us, and normally when I give this talk face-to-face, I like to ask everybody where they are in the process so I can tailor what I'm talking about. And I think especially here, since we're going to do the Q&A at the end, it might be helpful. So if you choose, it would be helpful for everyone to type into their chat box where they are in the process. Either I don't have, maybe you have self-direction, you have a budget already, maybe you're in startup. Hopefully you all have the Medicaid waiver, but if you don't, let us know. And also if you feel comfortable, if someone's a parent or an individual, if they're someone working in social services or not, again, that might be helpful. And hopefully you can see on the screen there, self-direction, that's the official OPWDD definition of self-direction. So the goal of this, and I run into this a lot when we start working on allocating the funds, the real goal of the self-direction program is to allow the individual to live in the community as freely as possible. So that's the goal. It's not necessarily reimbursing a couple dollars in clothing or something like that. So when again, dealing with some of the frustrations, sometimes I've run into situations where clients are frustrated because they can't reimburse a certain item that they were hoping to reimburse or get a certain program covered. For instance, like an educational program, and then, self-direction programs not designed to help with education. That's the Board of Ed's job. It's another department in the state, OPWDD, integration in the community. What are some of the benefits? So I've already mentioned what my son has received, and he had a typical budget. Again, his budget school age was around $54,000 a year. It's based on a fiscal year, depending on when your budget's approved. Let me see, if I think about my clients, I probably have budgets for anywhere from $39,000 for someone who might be considered high functioning to $59,000 for someone who's school aged. And then when they age out of the school system, again, I probably have a budget of $96,000 at the low end for an individual and $220,000 at the high end. So those amounts, which I'll talk about a little bit briefly here, are based on the age of the individual, whether or not they're receiving services from the Board of Ed, thus the 50K plus and the 100K plus budgets. And then also something called the DDP2, which stands for Developmental Disability Profile number 2. It's a questionnaire that you'll do with your care manager and or your broker once you have one. Takes about 15 minutes. There's questions about maybe medications that are taken, what are the primary diagnosis, how much help the individual may need to perform certain tasks, such as reading, can they read, or they're nonverbal, these types of things. Again, it maybe takes 15 minutes to fill out. That questionnaire is put into a computer system called Choices, which is OPWDD's computer system, and it'll spit out a number of scores, 3 of which are relevant for the self-direction budget. There's an adaptive score, a behavior score, and a health score. Once we have those scores, the broker takes it and puts it into a spreadsheet, which I'll show you later. And that, like I said, along with the age of the individual, calculates the amount of the budget. So the budget amount can change from time to time, but it shouldn't change that much. If it does change a lot, either there has to be a good reason, like I had a client who started having seizures all of a sudden, so the budget went up, or it may be indicated that there was a mistake. Maybe the care manager put something in wrong. So you kind of want to pay attention to that. It should be pretty steady though over time. Again, outside of some unusual health circumstance. Again, back to the benefits. You get control of using this money within the guidelines that OPWDD's created for this program. For instance, I have here hire fire. You have the ability to hire and fire your own staff. You can set the pricing for ComHab or respite staff, which we'll talk about. Again, within OPWDD guidelines, you can't pay someone $500 an hour, but you can pay someone potentially $30 an hour or $15 an hour. And you can choose your own programming, again, as long as it meets OPWDD's requirements. So I'm going to talk in a minute here about what my son has to illustrate. What can you spend the money on? Community classes is a popular area. Community classes could be fitness, swimming, art, music. It's really open. I have clients taking acting classes and learning to be stand-up comics, almost anything you can think of, tech classes. Reimbursements might be for such items as transportation is a common reimbursement for maybe if you're in a city, cabs or Ubers or even mileage. You can actually get airfare covered now, but for the individual, not for you. Self-hired staff, CH stands for ComHab and respite staff. ComHab staff just means, if you're not familiar with the term, it's someone you hire and they work with the individual in the community, which could be at home, and they do specific tasks, maybe to helping them with daily living skills, maybe helping them go to the store and go shopping, maybe helping them make a meal. It's really, again, it's something that you determine. Respite is really babysitting. My son's not a baby, but he has respite, and that's really more for me. When you age out or graduate, I should change that terminology to graduate budget, additional services can be added to the budget, which could include money towards rent, which Alex now provides. So he's paying some of the bills here, which again, I'll talk about in a minute. Maybe money towards utilities, and there's some other programs that you can use. So my case study is my son, Alex, who I keep mentioning, is 22 now. So some of the things we pay for with his budget right now, we have 8 staff people who are ComHab workers who work with him, and they work with him at home and in the community. They even take him to some of his programs. I get money towards rent. So we have an apartment here in Manhattan, and I get like $767 a month towards the rent. The amount is based on a calculation that's part of the budget. If we have time, we can go through it. But just so you know, the possible range for housing could be anywhere from maybe $400 a month up to $1,324 a month, which is the maximum anywhere in New York State. Alex is getting less because he's living with me. If he was living on his own, he could get $1,324. We also have community classes. So that's our other big spend besides staff and housing. Community classes for Alex consists of, he has, although not right now, unfortunately, we have a swim instructor and it pays for the health club. We also have a personal trainer. We have 2 art teachers. We have 2 music teachers. Alex said he wants to learn how to sing, I should say. Even though he's nonverbal, he can make sound, so he wants to learn how to sing. So we're going to work on that. And he also has, I mentioned he's nonverbal. He's been learning how to type. So I've actually gotten some, if you guys are familiar with RPM, which is rapid prompting method, we've gotten some programs where he's learning how to type on an iPad, and he's actually getting pretty good at it. So those are some typical things that we pay for. And again, Alex is a pretty typical budget. Oh, I should mention one more. There's a program that we pay for that I call it the farm. It's actually called Endeavor. It's upstate. He's doing it like a couple days a week. And he's going there and like feeding llamas and gardening and doing yoga and that kind of stuff. So that's some of what you can do with your $140,000. We've already talked about acronyms. I will try to stay away from them, but in this program, there are a lot of them. So for instance, today I was writing up meeting minutes, and what I always try to do in the meeting minutes is I use the actual terminology and then I parentheses the acronym, which is what you do on Wall Street when you're writing research reports, because eventually you want to try to save a little bit of time. So you go into that. So FI, I had already mentioned, is fiscal intermediary. OPWDD is the Medicaid agency of New York State for folks with developmental disabilities. So it's the office for people with developmental disabilities. DDRO, I may slip that in today as well. That just stands for Developmental Disability Regional Office. So each region has its own officer or team of officers. So I'll use Manhattan as an example. There are 3 people in the DDRO office in Manhattan, and they wind up working with you frequently on your budget, self-direction budget. They also do other things, but they work a lot with self-direction. PRA stands for Personal Resource Account. It's basically the amount of the budget that you have. SEMP, I actually need to take that off there. SEMP means supported employment. And there are supported employment programs now, but most of the fiscal intermediaries are moving away from them. So in future presentations, that probably will not be on here, but SEMP stands for supported employment, in case you see it in some documents. You know, I want my self-direction like my MTV. That's how old I am. How long will it take? You know, typically, as long as you have the Medicaid waiver, it'll take about 6 months. It could be quicker than that. It could be longer than that. There's a number of factors involved. And why it could be longer than that is because there's a number of actors also involved. So you have the care, I have to, you know, as the broker, I'm going to talk about the process, but I have to get some documents from the care manager to even begin the process. And sometimes your care manager may not be that responsive. So I've had cases where I've been waiting 6 months for documents from a care manager. We didn't even start yet. So the clock really hasn't started yet. And also sometimes there are problems with the bureaucracy itself. So for instance, OPWDD has someone who apparently approves something called a notice of decision. And then what I've been told is that there's really one person who does this. And this person was out for a while before COVID, and now they've been out for a good bit of time. So I have clients who have all their documents in order and they can't proceed because they don't have a notice of decision or NOD yet. And we're waiting for this person to get caught up. So yeah, some of the other frustrations, these are usually with your fiscal intermediary, where you can't get a particular class paid, or you don't know how to do the reimbursements and no one's helping you, or you difficult to find staff, which is true. And you don't know what kind of staff you want to have or how much to pay them. And also when you age out of the system, how do I get, you know, some people are getting money from rent, other people can't seem to get their rent approved. Some of these factors are based on which fiscal intermediary you choose. Some are frankly better than others, and some are actually better fit for one individual than another. So one of the things I do as a broker, if someone is a new case, I will usually interview them. I will ask what they want to have in the budget, maybe how much they want to pay staff. I assume that they prefer less paperwork to more. Do they want to use an electronic system or not? And based on those factors, I'll recommend a particular FI. One thing I'll add there is most brokers tend to work with 1 or 2 FIs. It's just the process to get set up with them. And that's probably why. When I came into this, I realized that as I started talking to these different FIs, they all do things a little bit differently. So I thought I would be different and work with all of the FIs, which I don't work with all of them now, but at the time when I signed up with all of them, I did. And I got a good sense of what's what, and I can offer different services to my client. And also, from my perspective, I mentioned working on Wall Street. I think of it sort of as a portfolio. If one FI is not being helpful to us, meeting with a particular client, we will fire that FI and we will switch to another FI. So just so you know, you can always fire your broker if they're not doing their job, and you can always fire or change your FI if they're not doing their job. You just may not hear that information from your broker or FI. I mean, your FI is probably not going to tell it to you, but the broker may not either, because if they're working with just one or two FIs, they're sort of captured by those one or two FIs, so they're not going to necessarily advise you to move. So you might want to be proactive on that if you're someone who's having a problem with an FI or a broker. Mastering self-direction, these are just some little hints that I like to give. So doing a little homework with the resources, that's really kind of what I just talked about, and more from the broker standpoint, but from the parent standpoint, just know that there are options out there for FIs. Now, some of you may, if you have self-direction now and you're not happy with your FI, when you got set up, you may have not had an option. There have been cases where in a particular region, only one FI is open. Or for instance, about 2 years ago in Long Island, there was not an FI that was taking cases for about 6 or 7 months. So you went with whoever was available. But again, that's fine if it's working. If they're not working, if it's not working now, almost every region now has multiple availabilities. Lean on your team. So I mentioned before that your regional OPWDD officer, the DDRO, your fiscal intermediary. Usually the way these fiscal intermediaries or FIs work is they will assign a particular individual to your case. I prefer that. I prefer that the client and myself as the broker have someone to go to, if we have an issue or a problem. There are FIs, though, who kind of have a more generalized approach. They're like, if you have a question about your budget, email budgets@fi.com or something like that. So again, that might be something to think about. If you're looking for an FI, you can ask, do you guys have individual liaisons, or am I going to be emailing FI at, Joe's FI, every so often and waiting weeks for an answer? And your broker, ideally your broker will be able to not only help you get through the process, but also be able to make recommendations as to programs and also how to efficiently use your budget. Once again, if not, look for another broker. And I understand, I mean, right now, this program's growing very rapidly. It takes a long time to get everything in place. And frankly, there are not enough brokers available. And as I mentioned before, from time to time, there may not be enough FIs available in a particular region. So you should and can interview the brokers. But I've taken over a number of cases from other brokers where the client hired the first person who answered the phone. Which when I got self-direction for Alex 7 years ago, I went and did an information session, which is part of the process, downtown on Beaver Street, which is where the Manhattan DDRO office is. And at the end of the meeting, they gave me a list of brokers taking cases. And I want to say that there was maybe 15 at the time on that list. I called and emailed all of them, and only one person got back to me. So, I don't know if that's still the case right now. I know that they've been, or at least until COVID, they were training a lot of brokers. But a lot of people may be taking the broker class to maybe handle their child's own case. Some of it do it part-time. I'm full-time. I think I've been running into more full-time brokers. So I think because it's actually an attractive position, because you can basically get as much business as you want. I think that's going to draw people, and eventually everything balances out in the end. I just don't know how long it's going to take. So right now, it's probably best to just get into the process and then adjust, meaning maybe changing the broker or the FI. Okay, organizational tools. What I do, a number of the fiscal intermediaries are now going electronic, where they're using a portal. And the portal, at least that I'm working with a handful of FIs, I wasn't a fan of it maybe a year and a half ago. It's actually working much better right now. And now I think it is helpful. So it is improving some of the tools that they're using. But I would encourage everyone, especially in regards to anything to do with money, to keep your own records and keep your own files. When you send documents in to the fiscal intermediary to be reimbursed, make sure you send it by email, and you copy other people on it. I always tell my clients they can copy me on it so that there's a trail if we have to go and see why you haven't been paid in 6 months, which has happened for some individuals. It should not happen. But I mentioned the volume in this business. It's easy for brokers to get cases. It's very easy for fiscal intermediaries to get cases. And as an illustration, there was an FI that opened up about a year and a half ago. In the course of about 8 months, they picked up 800 cases. And then they wisely closed their doors until they can digest that. But there are some FIs who just continue to take cases, even though they continue to fall further and further behind on the work they have, because there's no mechanism to really stop them from taking cases until they fall so far behind that OPWDD gets so many complaints that they can't take it anymore. And then they tell the FI to stop taking cases, at least for now. So again, that's something to be aware of. And that's another, if you're interviewing FIs, that's another question to bring up. How many cases do they have? How many cases do they think they can handle? So number 4, CC and BCC. So that's in regards to emailing. I think everyone knows those acronyms. You want to become the squeaky wheel, as I say. So for instance, again, when I send in my documents, when I send in my son's housing reimbursement every month, I keep a copy and I keep it in my file, and I can now send it in electronically by email, which I was doing anyway. At one point in time, they also wanted a hard copy of it. So what I would do would be, I would mail a hard copy, but I would also scan a copy and send it to someone at the FI so that they know the day I sent it in. Because there were cases where they're like, we didn't get it. And I'm like, I sent it to you, and then I wound up getting my money. If you don't have any record, you might be out that money. So that's being the squeaky wheel, copying people and stuff. And that's what you have to do on Wall Street, because everyone's always trying to backstab you. The 3 Ps. So for patience, persistence, and politeness. So it's very easy to get frustrated at your care manager, your broker, and your FI, and maybe your DDRO officer, and you may be justifiably so frustrated with them. And there is a time to be upset, be angry, and to send emails to the head of the OPWDD and that kind of stuff. But I've found the 3 Ps here, especially the politeness, will help you in the long run, because I try to, most of the people I've run into who are doing either the broker role or the FI role, and I was talking to Mallory and Cayle at this beginning, even most of the people, my understanding is, who are running OPWDD right now, most of the people running this program do not have an individual with special needs, so they don't really understand our situation, certainly not like we do. So I try to educate them on that. So certainly, I mean, every once in a while, I will kind of go off on an FI. And again, that's why I try to, if I have conversations with people, I will talk to certainly people on the phone and stuff. But if there's some, if we're trying to clean up some issue or someone's not responding, I'm going to do it by email, because we're going to have the trail. And then we're going to, if we're having problems with the fiscal intermediary, for instance, which will come up quite frequently, depending on which FI you work with, then I'm going to bring in maybe the DDRO, my regional officer. And if they're not helpful enough, we may go to Albany. So again, just some little tips there. Hopefully I didn't dwell on that too much. Now we're going to come to the process. So first of all, you will learn about self-direction. Hopefully this will be helping you with that. And then, do you have the Medicaid waiver? I'm just curious, Mallory, did we get any stats on that, where our audience is at?
Yeah, there are some folks who are waiting for their Medicaid waiver to be approved.
Okay.
And there are some who are just starting the process. It looks like most most people in the room have a waiver, but there are some who do not.
Okay, so if you do not have the waiver, I think Cayle was going to maybe weigh in on some of those questions for someone who doesn't have the waiver. You do need to have the waiver first. My understanding, and Cayle, you can correct me if wrong, my understanding was it could take a year to get the waiver. Is that still accurate? Like if you're
Right.
starting from scratch.
Right.
Right.
So once you submit your application to the OPWDD, you should receive what's called a notice of or determination or eligibility within 30 days. They're obligated to give you an answer. And obviously the best outcome is that you're approved on the first try, but they might forward it to a review. But if you do obtain eligibility right away, then the next step is to enroll you in Medicaid. And enrolling you in Medicaid can take, you know, I've seen it take a month or I've seen it take 3 months. I think in a way things have ironically sped up since everything, the offices has been shut and everything has been moved online because people respond much faster to emails, but it can be kind of spotty. But just enrolling in Medicaid can take a month to 3 months. And then after that, you need to be enrolled in the waiver. And the waiver can also take, you're right, it can take up to 6 months, but it's really hard to say how long that will take. So if you assume the worst case scenario and you give yourself 6 months, you might be pleasantly surprised and find out that it only takes like 1 or 2 months. So we're constantly in touch with the care managers at the care coordination organizations to see kind of what the word is on the street, how long that's taking. But right now, I mean, everything is open. I just want to let people know that they shouldn't hesitate to apply to the OPWDD because everything is open. Whether it's front door, whether it's eligibility, whether it's self-direction, everything is open. And as far as the CCOs, the care coordination organizations, they are also all open and functioning. All the government offices, Medicaid, Social Security, everything is open. It's just kind of difficult to predict how long all of these things took. But things are moving and you should definitely start the process. And yeah, as far as obtaining Medicaid and the next step, which is Medicaid waiver, that can take upwards of, 6 months to a year, but very often it takes less than that.
Okay, thanks, Cayle. So after you have your Medicaid waiver and you have a CCO, which is Care Coordination Organization, which downstate, I'm assuming everyone's downstate here. There are 3 CCOs who are serving this area, which is Advanced Care Alliance, Care Design New York, and also Tri-County Care. And we can, I don't know if it makes sense, we can maybe answer some questions on those later, but I won't dwell on that right now. And then you'll be assigned a care manager at the CCO. Once you have that, you're going to want to attend a regional information session. Sometimes as you go through the self-direction process, as I'm submitting documents, the DDRO may ask, hey, where's the document that said this individual or the parent attended an information session? Sometimes they ask for it, sometimes they don't. It's just helpful to kind of get it out of the way. You used to have to go to a meeting. Again, I'll use Manhattan as an example. They would have meetings once a month. I think it was once a month or bi-monthly, once a month down on 25 Beaver Street, but now everything is virtual. So on the OPWDD site, there are links where you can attend these information sessions. And when you sign up online, you get an email, and I think you maybe even get a certificate that says you attended the session. So you checked off that box. What's going to happen is there's going to be a 2-hour talk. You'll probably forget most of the information. And at the end, they're going to give you a list of brokers, and then you're going to start contacting the brokers. That's the next number 4 here. You should interview brokers. Like I said, there's not enough brokers, but that doesn't mean you should just take the first person. I would ask a number of questions, including which fiscal intermediaries they work with, how do they choose a fiscal intermediary for a client, how many budgets, how many clients do they have, certainly what regions do they cover. The state, right now, like it used to be regionally set, but now it's sort of there's a statewide system now to be a broker. Once you get training, you're approved in the state. But some brokers are going to work closer to home, because there is a meeting requirement. You're supposed to meet face-to-face with the broker at least twice a year. It could be more than that, although right now, of course, that is, electronic is allowed. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case going forward. I wouldn't be surprised if it is, that all meetings go electronic. But if not, there is a requirement of 2 times face-to-face. So that's why some brokers may focus on a particular region just to limit the travel. Once you have a broker, you will then find or choose a fiscal intermediary. And as I mentioned before, it helps if the broker works with a number of FIs, or if you know of a particular FI that you've heard is good and maybe want to work with them for a particular reason. Maybe maybe a program you want your individual to use is only approved at that FI. Maybe that broker can get set up with that particular FI. But the broker should, again, ask you what programs you want to use, and also what community classes, how much you want to pay staff. Those are the 3 key factors that I ask people. And then based on that, I'm usually going to recommend 1 or 2 brokers in a particular region. And then I'll give the client the option. Do you want to do your own due diligence? Do you want to talk to the fiscal intermediary? There are a couple FIs that actually require a meeting. And again, it's electronic now with the FI. So they sort of interview you and decide if they want to take you. Other FIs will just say, they'll take anybody. But if you don't want to, which most of my clients probably did not want, as I think about it, the majority did not want to care about the FI. They just took my recommendation. That's also fine, if you have the option. So again, my key takeaway for that particular item, and I think it's one of the more important ones, is, do you have an option of choosing the FI? Because I'm guessing later on, if some of you already have FIs, a number of questions are going to be about the problems you're having with your FI. So after you've chosen the FI and you've signed what's called a broker agreement, it's a startup broker agreement, it's this official OPWDD document. You sign it, and then the broker's going to, what I do is I send a broker agreement to the care manager, and I ask for what I call the startup documents. There's a number of documents, depending on which FI you choose, that the broker needs to initiate the startup process. Startup is the first part of self-direction. Typically, the documents might be that DDP-2, that questionnaire that I mentioned earlier. There's also something called a life plan. Most of you probably have a life plan. We talked about this notice of decision, the NOD, and there's a bunch of other acronyms I won't go into right now, but I asked the care manager for all those. And again, as the client, you don't really have to do that much if all these documents have been prepared for you. Once the care manager sends me all that, which is potentially one of the bottlenecks, but once I get all those documents from the care manager and I make sure they're all current, I package it up with the broker agreement and then something called a startup template, and I'll show you my son's later on here. And I send all that to the fiscal intermediary. They're going to review it, make sure everything's current, it looks good, and then they're going to send it to the DDRO for whatever region you live in. The DDRO is going to review it. Again, everything's good. They're going to send it to Albany, central office for OPWDD in Albany. And then Albany is going to send everybody on the team, which is the broker, the care manager, the individual, and the FI. They're going to send them an email saying you've been approved for startup as of 9/1. This initial process is sort of pre-self-direction. You're not really in self-direction yet. When you get that email from OPWDD saying you're approved for startup as of 9/1, that's sort of when the clock starts, because at that point, you have self-direction. The only services you have are fiscal intermediary and brokerage, and that's so the fiscal intermediary and broker can get paid for setting up the budget. At that point, as I mentioned here, the broker works with the family to create the budget, and depending on what's in the budget, other associated documents. So, for example, we get the approval as a team. I look at the DDP-2. I calculate the amount of the budget. It's $54,000. I talk with the client multiple times if necessary. What do you guys want to do? Do you guys want to have staff? You already have staff. We're going to hire them. How much do you want to pay them? How many hours per week? what kind of community classes do you want, if any? Do you want to pay for memberships? Do you want a membership to the 14th Street Y, for instance, to go swimming? Do you want reimbursements for transportation? Is the individual older and you want housing in the budget? Any number of these things. We'll work on the budget as long as it takes. Typically, we can get it done pretty quickly, maybe 1 or 2 phone calls. And what I'll do is I'll take notes of what you want in the budget, and then I'm going to put the budget actually together, rough draft. I'm going to send it to the client, ask them to look at it, and then we'll have a follow-up conversation and refine it as many times as necessary. Usually it's only 1 or 2 times, so we can probably get that done pretty quickly depending on the client's availability. Once we have the budget set, then I'm going to do any associated documents. Primarily, if we have staff in the budget, I have to create something called a staff action plan. I won't detail that too much right now, but basically that's the job instructions, what you want ComHab staff to do with the individual. And again, that may involve a couple iterations where we'll go back and forth making edits or not. Once we have those 2 documents primarily, and maybe some others depending on which FI we're working with, and we're happy with them. And again, or not again, it's the first time I'm saying this, it doesn't have to be perfect, because you can always make changes to the budget throughout the process. That's actually what the broker does for you. I have clients that make changes every month. I have clients who've never made a change in a couple of years. So once we have all that information together, the budget and the staff action plan and other associated documents, it's going to go through the same process we did for startup. It's going to be reviewed by the FI, by the DDRO, and by Albany. And then you're going to get an email that says, congratulations, your budget's effective as of 11/1. And that means you can start using it. You actually have the ability to call on those funds to pay for various services starting on 11/1, just as an example. It's always going to be the first of a month. After that, after you receive that approval, the FI should contact you to set up what's called a launch meeting. They used to be face-to-face. Right now they're virtual. The attendees of the launch meeting will be, the individual and the family, the broker, someone from the FI's office, and probably someone from the DDR's office, but I'm seeing less and less DDRs, and also the care manager. I shouldn't leave out the care manager. And at that meeting, the fiscal intermediary or FI is going to go through how to use the budget, how to reimburse for mileage, for instance. They might review the staff that you've hired, and we could talk a little bit more about staff. And then after that meeting, you're probably going to forget everything because they throw so much information at you, and then you continue to follow up with your broker and FI as necessary. I probably talk to most of my clients in the course of, some clients I talk to probably weekly. Other clients are, might only be every couple months, but I probably hear from almost everybody on at least 6-week basis, I'd say. So, it is a team. So you want to make sure that you feel confident with your broker. Here I have, so that's the process, how to get the budget. And then, like I said, after that, it's a refining process. The way I think about the budget is, especially right now, I want to get the budget out there and active. And then we're going to refine it and make it better over time. So you're getting more and more money out of it. And then once you're getting all of the money out of it, I'm going to try to help you get the money out more efficiently. So for instance, if you're spending $32,000 on classes and they're all paying directly, that's great because you don't have to do any paperwork. It's free money. Your individual's going to classes. Alex is going swimming and doing art, and I never see a bill. And he's getting staff. Or, that would be great. Or you're not using $32,000 in classes and you're trying to figure out how best to allocate this money. Maybe we'll put money in transportation and then reimbursement, and that's fine too. But then you're doing paperwork or sending emails out every month and collecting taxi receipts and everything like that. And again, that's totally fine if you're not using all your budget. But if you're going to use $32,000 in classes, it's a more efficient way to get the same amount of money in your pocket. So again, that's how we refine things over time. Here on this screen, I just updated today some of the resources that include New York Guide on there. Is a little dated, but I think it's still pretty good. It's pretty extensive too, so that's not a bad resource. The New York Self-Determining Coalition, for anyone who's taking care of their own budget, I would get in touch with those folks. And then OPWDD recently updated their website. Those links are new. I just put them in there today. There's a general self-direction guide on there, and then If you're in the process of getting set up, there's a contact us page there if you need to do some of these information sessions and such. And I think we're to Q&A time now.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Sure.
I know this is a lot of information, and I also know that there are a lot of questions that have been asked in the chat, and we also want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask questions verbally as well. So, Ken, I also realized, did you want to share the budget that your son's budget that you put together?
Yes, I'm glad you're mentioning it, and I know I talked about it and I forgot to say, so I'm going to bring it up now. Can you see that? Is everybody seeing that? Okay,
yes.
Great. So this is my son Alex's budget there. I took out some of the information there. So this is what it looks like if you don't have it. It's an Excel spreadsheet that OPWDD created. It's got a lot of macros in it, so you can only, if you have this, you can't break it. You can only input into the yellow areas there. So some notable items here. Here, if you can see where I'm pointing here, these are the DDP2 scores. So this is Alex's adaptive score, his health score, and his behavior score there. Those items, along with the answer to this question here, yields his PRA, or the amount of the budget, which right here is $135,000. That's what he has to spend on an annual basis. And his fiscal year down here, the green cells are for OPWDD only. The green cell down here, his annual date, fiscal date is 6/1. That's when his initial budget was originally approved. The transmittal date is just the date that the latest version of this budget was sent out. And the amendment date just means that that was the date that the amendment was approved. So even though, and these can get confusing, the transmittal date will say 3/5. That's when we received notice that Alex's budget was updated effective 2/1. So yeah, bureaucracy at work. So that's sort of the information page here. You know, you'll have, I just took it off, you'll have the contact info for the FI, the broker. Here is where the broker is going to choose which services you want to have in the budget. Then we have the self-hired staff page here. So we have, at the particular FI we use, the maximum you could pay someone is $23.50. So that's what we have here. And as you can see, I have it just broken up just to make it easy. There's like 60 hours per week that we can use at that rate of pay. One question I'd offer, so Alex has the ability to pay, you know, $88,000, almost $89,000 towards staff. I mentioned we have probably 7 people set up as staff. Most of them are backup, but a couple people work close to full-time hours. One question also that comes up here is this fringe rate. The fringe rate here, 27%. Each FI will have their own fringe rate or fringe rates. Some of them have multiple tiers. What the fringe rate is so we're paying the worker $23.50, but we have to add on 27% here, and that's where this totally hour unit cost of $29.85 comes from. That's the amount that comes out of the budget. So the worker is getting $23.50, $29.85 is coming out of the budget. 27% is the difference. That's being added, or that money's going to the FI to cover benefits. So if you have someone working full-time, the way self-hired staff works is as an individual or family, you hire and fire the staff, but the employer of record is the FI. They get their taxes taken out by the FI. The FI is their employer on their paycheck. Thus, they get the benefits equivalent to anyone else working the same amount of hours at that FI. So someone working in the accounting department at Alex's FI, someone working full-time, they're paying 27% fringe rate. They're going to get equivalent benefits. At Alex's FI, someone working 30 hours a week or more, they're going to get health insurance if they want it. They're going to get disability insurance. They're going to get a 401k match at 6%. That's just an example. Different FIs are going to have different packages. So if you have staffing and you have some maybe staff who've been working with you for years, potentially before you had a budget, and you want to take care of them, you know, they're interested in insurance, that might be another factor in choosing an FI because they all have different packages. So that's another reason to do your own due diligence. If a benefit package is important, you want to find out. as a broker, I have some of that information, but because as we get these packages, I hold on to it. They change them from time to time. But the FIs don't have that information on their website, just as if you worked at Deutsche Bank, you know, they don't tell you what your insurance is going to be, or your vacation or whatever like that. So again, if benefits for your staff are important, you might want to shop FIs. Brokerage, that's the amount that the broker gets paid. So I talked about self-direction being sort of a two-step process, as it were. One is that startup process when you get approved initially by OPWDD, and then there's the part when your budget becomes effective. Before your budget is effective, there's no budget. So the way the broker and the FI get paid are directly by OPWDD. We have to do invoices, and most of the time, the client's going to have to sign off or approve by email for the invoice. I have to bill hourly, and then we submit that to the FI, and they pay us, and OPWDD pays the FI for paying us. Once there's a budget, the broker will get paid out of the budget. So for instance, here in Alex's budget, we have allocated $2,400 for his broker. The broker has to bill for that, so they may not use all $2,400, but that's what we have allocated for it. So one question, well, wasn't really a question, but conversation that Mallory, Cayle, and I were having at the beginning, I was talking about how to think about the budget. And a lot of times I'm dealing with, you know, one of the frustrations, again, with communication and the way things are named in this program, when they talk about budget, it's not like there's an account with $135,000 of Alex's money sitting in the budget. We have the ability to call on $135,000 in funding from the state. It's not your money sitting in an account somewhere that the FI is trying to keep you from spending. This support broker is one of the services we can pay for with his budget, and right now we have allocated $2,400 here. If we don't use all that, we don't use all that. It just never gets pulled from the state. If we're not going to use it all and we're getting near the end of the year and I have use for this elsewhere, I may allocate this to another category. And you can do that with any of the categories we're going to talk about, including staff. IDGS, one of those acronyms, which stands for Individually Directed Goods and Services. What this is, there's a number of items in here. You'll see camp community classes, which is where we have all of Alex's money, $32,000, because Alex is out of school. We easily spend $32,000 on classes every fiscal year. And it's easy because I have everyone doing direct pay, so I don't have to do anything. This $32,000 just magically flows to all the people working with Alex, and that's pretty good. $32,000 is the cap for this entire category. Unfortunately, I would like it to be higher than that. You know, at a $135,000 budget, $32,000 for classes is pretty good, but $32,000 is also the cap for someone who's school age. So for school age, $32,000 is a lot of money for just after school and weekends. Alex now has all day. So $32,000, in my opinion, not quite enough. I'm more than happy to take it, but it would be helpful if some of this money, for instance, could be used over here, or at least freely flowing between. They don't do that right now. I'd actually like to try to convince them otherwise, but we'll see if I get the chance. There's a number of other categories in here. I'm not going to go through them all. Health club, you know, again, you want to pay for membership at the 14th Street Y or New York Sports, or if it's open or anything like that, you can do. Transportation is another popular category. There's 2 transportation accounts in the budget. I don't have any money here, but if I did, this transportation account would be associated with any other items here. So if we were going to Camp Ramapo up here and I drove him to Camp Ramapo, I can reimburse the mileage. Or if we were going to swimming or other programs out of this $32,000, out of this class money, and I had some money here, I can use that money here. This money could also be used for staff. If staff is taking Alice out in the community, he likes to ride the bus, which is free now, but when they have to charge again, you know, we can reimburse that. But again, I more efficiently use the money here, so I don't bother doing paperwork with this every month. But again, if you're not using all this money, spread it out. I don't have these tabs in Alex's budget. They're not common tabs. I have a large number of cases. I don't have anyone that has a live-in caregiver. It's sort of like a staff person, but they live with the individual and they can get different services paid for it. But again, I have a pretty good representation, so it's not a common service. Agency supported services. So if you are receiving services, maybe respite or ComHab, and you don't have the self-direction budget yet, but you're getting them maybe from YAI or SKIP or someone like that, and you want to continue that even when you have self-direction, this is sort of the place where you can do it. You can get various programs at the traditional agencies, again, someone like a YI or AHRC, and you can pay for them out of here. They give you, you don't get to decide how much they're going to pay. There's a unit and a rate per unit here. There's 2 areas in the budget like this. It's a set rate, you know, it's set in conjunction with the state. A broker will, if we're getting agency supported services, I have to go look up the rate and number of units. Typically I have to contact someone at like AHRC, how many units were they approved for? Then I have to look up the rate, and that's the total cost, and that comes out of your budget. Because once you have self-direction, you can't use those traditional services except through the budget. So you have to pay for it through the budget. Housing. So this looks like a mess. It's actually not that bad. This is the housing tab. Again, you have to be 18 or over, and you have to have aged out of the school system. That fits with this first page of the budget here where you're answering this question. Less than 22 years old, residing, you know, if you answer no to any one of those 3 questions there, then you're going to be able to use housing as an option. So the factors that go into this determine the amount of money that you get. There's a number of factors: what type of apartment it is, you know, how many bedrooms, how many people live there. Also, you know, how much money does Alex get from SSI? Although that's a very small determining factor. How much is the rent? How much is requested? And here's actually what you get. Alex gets the 732. Actually, I thought it was 767, 732. So on an annual basis, that's $8,784. Now, if you don't get housing, you know, your individual's not, your individual is receiving services from the Board of Ed. There's something called family reimbursed respite. This is not on right now because you either have housing or family reimbursed respite. Family reimbursed respite is $3,000. That's the cap. It's a very easy category to pull funds out. You could pay anyone any amount of money to provide respite. Respite could be a number of things. It could be, you know, grandpa and grandma staying over for the weekend and we're paying them $50 an hour. You don't have to watch Alex while I go out to eat. It could be a program that's for some reason not approved elsewhere in the budget. You could pay for it out of this. So again, it's $3,000 on an annual basis. When you take the broker training, they literally tell you we're trying to give everybody $3,000, and this is the easiest way we came up with it. OTPS, other than personal services, similar to IDGS, there's a number of items in here. You'll see clothing, internet, phone service. So if someone has a phone or they have internet access, you can pay for activity fees for staff. You can pay for recruitment costs for staff, for instance, an ad on care.com. If you're eligible for food stamps and it's deemed to be not enough, you can get some of the money out of here. This category is also capped at $3,000. There's utilities. Some of these factors or some of these items are based on the age of the individual. For instance, clothing, for some reason, you have to be 18 over to get clothing. Other goods and services that increase independence, where I have $3,000 here. This is sort of a little trick for anyone out there. If you're not happy with the $32,000 in IDGS, you can put $3,000 in independence here. And as long as the community class is something to do with independence. So for instance, I mentioned before, Alex learning how to type. It wouldn't be the gym, but it would be Alex learning how to type, or Alex learning how to do stuff in the community. That could be billed out of this. So in effect, you wind up with $35,000 in classes. And then if you have family reimbursed respite, I mentioned you could pay anything, anybody, any amount of there. You can kind of increase it up to $38,000 in classes. So that's a little broker trick. Direct provider purchased, again, is not turned on right now. It's similar to that agency supported. So if someone's going to AHRC Camp Ann, you would pay for it out of here. Camp Ramapo, which is a private camp, would get paid out of IDGS camp. So it can get confusing. That's why it's helpful if a broker has some experience working with a range of cases. This is the budget summary tab here. There's a lot of information that's carried over from elsewhere in the budget, and particularly contact information, which is why some of it's blanked out because I took it out. But this is kind of the main item here. Well, there's 2 items here. So this is the main item where You have that total PRA, which is personal resources account, which is the amount of the budget Alex has approved, which is 135,214. Total services is the amount of money that's allocated on all these tabs. The difference may be zero. It's always going to be zero or positive. In this case, it's $92. That means we don't have $92 allocated. The reason that is because we have everything capped out in OTPS, in housing, in IDGS, in brokerage. We have the maximum amount of money. And for self-hired staff, if I added one more week or one more day, we would be over budget. So unfortunately, that $92 cannot be allocated. So that's why that's sitting there. The other item of note on this page here is your fiscal intermediary fee. So here you'll see that the FI gets paid $650 a month or $7,800 a year. So if you have an FI and you're happy with them, that's great. You're paying them $7,800 a year. If you're not happy with them, you're paying them $7,800 a year, and you should fire them and give that money to somebody else. So that's the budget, or a budget, really quick. I'll minimize that, and back to the Q&A time. Thanks, Mallory, for that reminder.
Yeah. So before we move off, just quickly, because I also want to respect everybody's time, there's some questions directly related to the budget, just so if we want to answer those really quickly before we go back to the chat questions from before.
Okay.
Debbie is asking who's creating the workbook, the Excel sheet, and also who decides the caps that are in each category.
Yeah, so the answer to both of those is OPWDD. So the Excel spreadsheet is an OPWDD document. You know, you don't create it from scratch, but you can modify it. What I usually do is I take a blank one and use it as a draft template, and then I send it back and forth to the client, and we modify and send it in. So it is an OPWDD document. So they create it, and then, I'm sorry, the second half of that question, Mallory?
How are the caps decided for each category?
So yeah, so the caps are based on, again, it's an OPWDD cap. So some of the caps, real quick, I'll work backwards from the budget. Excuse me, OTPS, which was that other than personal services, $3,000. That's capped for that category. Family reimbursed respite, $3,000. Housing could be up to, I think if you have that full amount that I mentioned earlier in the talk, 1,324, works out to like 15,888, something like that. That's the maximum for housing. If you have housing, you don't have family reimbursed respite. Those three categories, you have, you know, two of the three. Those categories, though, are funded by the state. So when you see it there, it says state-funded services. So that money comes from the state of New York, those categories. The rest of the budget is from the federal government. So Medicaid is a quasi-federal state program. The bulk of the money comes from the federal government, but the state administers it and puts some of the money into the budget. So a lot of times you'll hear talk about, you know, the federal funded or the state funded. That's what it is. There's two pools of money, and there's two ways of reimbursing funds. So that's why sometimes it's difficult to get money from one category or another category, because it doesn't come out of one pot, because some of the money is reimbursed on one computer system, some of the money is reimbursed on the other. You don't actually have to do that. That's either the FI or OPWDD doing that. But again, sometimes it helps to understand why certain things are the way they are in the budget. It's because there's two funding streams and they use different reimbursement schemes or systems to get the money out of the budget.
Great, thank you. Everyone is very thankful and wants to know if you're taking new clients.
Okay, so yeah, no, I figured that. Unfortunately, right now, I'm not. What I usually tell people is that if someone lives really close to me, I may take the case, but I do have a large caseload right now. And I recently, so last year at this time, OPWDD, I mentioned that there's a number of face-to-face meetings, and I'm just sort of explaining it a little bit. There were 4 required face-to-face meetings, so I had X number of clients because there's travel involved, and you have to go see the people and stuff like that, which is fine, but you know, it is downtime, and I am a single parent. But then last year at about this time, they reduced the required meetings to 2 times a year. So then I took on a handful of clients, and then I kind of reached where I felt was where I can get things done in a timely manner. So I usually tell clients, I'm going to try to respond to emails within 24 hours. And as of right now, all my emails are current as of today. So I'm pretty happy about that. Sometimes it can stretch for a couple days, or sometimes it's even more than that. Ideally, that doesn't happen too much, maybe around like billing time. But generally speaking, I try to respond to stuff within 24 hours. A couple days is probably a reasonable expectation. If a broker is taking longer than that on a regular basis to get back to you, that's unacceptable. But and then recently, when we went to everything electronic, I don't have to travel anymore, so I'm doing all the meetings like this. So then I took a handful more cases, and I'm absorbing a few right now. So if someone lives like in the 90s on the east side, I might be persuaded to take the case right now. But there are a couple other brokers that I'm mentoring and I can refer people to. So we can, maybe that could be something that we follow up with on this. But yeah.
Great.
Sorry.
Thanks, Ken.
Sure.
Cayle, did you want to mention some information about Medicaid and Medicare?
Yes, hi. So I am actually a credentialed work benefits practitioner, which means I can advise families on any issues related to Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. So Social Security pertains to supplemental security income, which is that payment that Ken alluded to that Alex receives every month. There's also Social Security disability, and if you or your family member starts working, I can advise you on how to help them retain those federal benefits while still being able to work. There are a lot of work incentives out there that help you to do that. So I'm happy to help enroll in anyone in any of those systems, and also to help them if they're having any problems or issues, and just to answer any general questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Cayle. And I know Cayle also put her information in the chat, but we'll send it in a follow-up email as well. I'm going to stop recording so that